Hey everyone, so welcome. My name is Benjamin Day,
And I'm Jillian Mason.
and this is the Medicare for All podcast, the podcast for everybody who needs healthcare, which is most people, as it turns out.
Some
Um,
people.
so this week, we're going to talk about this is kind of part of a theme. We're starting to talk about, when we are able to get back to doing in-person organizing, which in some places of the country it's safe to do if you do it safely. In some places, we still probably need to wait. But we're going to start talking more and more about the in-person organizing tactics that we're going to need to use as a movement to actually win Medicare for all. And this episode, we wanted to talk about deep canvassing, which is, it's actually a relatively new organizing tactic that kind of focuses on engaging voters in empathetic conversations. Is that how you say it? Empathic, empathetic,
Empathetic.
empath.
An empath is someone who knows your thoughts or whatever.
Well, I think that would work too. Very effective as a door knocking technique. But yeah, use your fucking empathy is the term I was looking for.
Yes.
And there's been all these studies showing that deep canvassing can be effective in reducing prejudice against marginalized communities. It can actually change voters' minds on issues like immigration and transgender rights. So we want to talk about how effective deep canvassing is, and also how can it be a tool in the fight for Medicare for all. So we are very excited to have a guest on this episode. Our guest is Lizzie Rutberg, who is a Boston-based activist and an experienced campaign organizer. She has firsthand experience with deep canvassing from her work with the 2018 Yes on 3 campaign for transgender equality in Massachusetts. So Lizzie, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you all so much for having me. This is my first time being on a podcast. So I'm just happy to be here.
You're killing it already.
Yeah, add it to your resume right away. Will be references for you. So I actually want to start, before we get into your experience deep canvassing, Lizzie, I want to ask Jillian a background question, which is, what were the origins of the deep canvassing model? I kind of alluded to it being new-ish. But where did this tactic come from?
It's like new 2.0, right? I mean, so really this tactic comes from, being human and having conversations like people have been having for millions of years. Have we been around for millions of years? I'm not really good with but right. Somehow we drifted into a kind of mode where political organizing has become something kind of different, right, from the average, conversations that we have with each other every day. And so in 2008, right, there were some LGBTQ activists in California, specifically with the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and basically Prop 8, which was a really terrible homophobic anti-trans law. It really passed, and it was a terrible thing for California. So activists basically went door to door, and they were trying to understand voters better, especially voters who were against marriage equality. And this strategy was kind of revolutionary. This going back to a kind of really human way of talking to people, and really like listening to people, having deep conversations, hence deep canvassing. And then this strategy has become tremendously popular in all sorts of different, sectors of the social justice movement. And it's become popular also in other parts of the country where marriage equality was on the ballot. If you wanted to check out a good overview of it, there is a really good article called "With COVID-19, Is Deep Canvassing the Key to Defeating Trump in 2020?" It's a great article. No spoilers, they defeated Trump in 2020. So there you
that
go.
Article would have so much mud on its face if Trump won in 2020.
But yeah, anyway, it also includes the notable quote, "Jesus was a deep canvasser," which is good to note.
Did I say it was a new tactic? I was mistaken. Except for the biblical times.
Not exactly new, but newish. So I mean, that's a little bit about like where this idea of deep canvassing has come from, sort of resurgence of these kind of persuasive conversations. And in Massachusetts, we were lucky enough to be smack in the middle of a really great deep canvassing campaign. And so Lizzie did some really amazing work in organizing on that campaign. So you were involved with this massive effort, right, as part of the Massachusetts Trans Rights Yes on 3 campaign. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the campaign and how you got trained up to do this particular kind of tactic?
Absolutely. So the context of the ballot referendum, statewide ballot referendum, was in 2016, I think. State legislature passed, Governor Baker signed into law a law that would give transgender people, non-binary people, gender non-conforming people legal protections against discrimination in public spaces. So that's, your libraries, the subway, the grocery store, anywhere that isn't home, work, school, restrooms, but also, every other space as well. Very quickly afterwards, the Christian Right of Massachusetts got a bunch of signatures to get onto the ballot a statewide referendum for 2018 on whether we should keep that law in place or whether we should get rid of it, and trans people should just not have the protections anymore. So I was blissfully unaware of all of this in August 2017. I was having dinner with a friend of mine in Davis Square when a street canvasser came up to me and they were like, hey, did you know that your civil rights are going to be up for a statewide vote in 14 months? I was like, oh, shit. Oh, fuck. I didn't know that, actually.
My rights.
It's more likely than you think. I guess I better do something about that. So got on the email list, signed up for a canvass in Quincy in October 2017, schlepped down to Quincy, Massachusetts on the Red Line. It was a really extraordinary experience. I still remember so many details about my first action. Part of what made their deep canvassing operation, their field program, so effective was just the amount of effort they put into welcoming new volunteers, helping people feel safe, making it someplace where people could be vulnerable and where trans people felt safe and respected no matter how they presented. Because my presentation back in 2017
I thought you were
not great.
But
well, thanks, Jillian. Maybe that was just the dysphoria talking. Regardless, I was a very nervous person. So, I go into the Union Hall where they were launching the canvas. Right as soon as I enter the room, a volunteer named Pippin, who I would later become roommates with,
love Pippin,
was like, hey there, welcome aboard, have a sticker, sign in, have a name tag, put your name and pronouns on it so people will know how to address you, sit over there, wait 5 minutes, there will be a training. And it's like, oh man, I feel, I know exactly what's going on here. The training itself was really brilliant. It was almost an hour long, which is, I think, unusual in campaign spaces, but I think was necessary and helpful. We start off with introduction, give everyone a chance to tell their personal stories of why they're there, and then just really dive into the curiosity, role play a conversation, have people rehearse it so that they've seen it and done it before going out. Am I talking too much? Can I talk about can I just go into like?
Oh no! This is fascinating. This is totally
Yeah,
fascinating.
we want the blow by blow of the training, please.
All of it.
All right, I'll go into the structure of the conversation we use.
That's perfect. Yeah.
So we start with a like 0 out of 10 scale. How likely are you to support these rights for trans people? 10 being like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm not even thinking about it. Versus 0, like, die.
Good.
And run at that point.
So once we got the initial answer, we asked someone, why that is, what sort of like favorable opinions you have about trans people or human rights or non-discrimination, what sort of like, sort of things might they be uncomfortable with, just sort of that curiosity.
Right.
Yeah. Leading with lots of questions.
Right. The questions, the delving into the psyche, being someone like the way it felt was sort of like being someone's therapist for about 10 minutes at a time about gender issues. And then about halfway through the conversation, we had this little like Amazon like Kindle, product placement here on this fine podcast. That had the video loaded up with a like aggressive like trans misogynistic ad about like, oh, if trans people are allowed equal access to public facilities, trans women are gonna rape your kids. Some like, real dangerous, like scary, like fear-mongering stuff. So we would play that video for the voter.
So you're literally just standing there.
And we're like, yeah.
Showing them a video that says that you're like less than a human being and are terrifying.
Yes.
Oh my God. What does that feel like?
I was like pretty good. After a couple of canvases, I honestly got like kind of dissociated from it. So I was just like, well, time to show the video. The thoughts and feelings I have about the video, they are not surfacing right now. Time to show a video about how voters should hide their children from me specifically.
And what do you think the role of why do you think they had you do that? What was the role of the anti-video?
It's inoculation. So I'd show them the video and I'd be like, yeah, okay, so this is something that some people say about, this policy. What do you think about that? Do you like anything here that resonates with you? And some people would be like, oh, that is obviously like fear-mongering bullshit. I hate it. And I'd be like, tight, me too. And some people would be like, oh, actually, I forgot that I thought this way. Yeah, no, this raises some points. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, tell me more. What, specific things are you concerned of? What have you heard about? What, like, is it here that touches a nerve for you? And I'd sit back neutrally and, like, calmly, and as they would say, like, oh, trans women, they're fine, but men in dresses, that's where the problems arise. And so I was like, yeah. And then I had a few sort of talking points and, like, tell my personal story from there and be like, and I'd say, like, lest we forget, this policy isn't, legalizing harming people. Like, oh, and people would be like, oh yeah, no, you're right, it isn't actually, or I'd be like, yeah, I mean, evidence shows from all the states where this was implemented that there isn't actually an increase in like assaults. And people would be like, oh, that's comforting.
There's mostly just an increase in trans people using the bathroom.
And then I tell my personal story about like, oh, I'm just a humble transsexual. But I guess what I learned from it, like that structure of conversation, is that if right off the bat, if it was a 30-second conversation of, oh, I'm here for this policy, it doesn't actually like like its evidence shows that it doesn't actually increase assaults. Will you vote for it? And people would be like,
Right.
and it would take 5 to 8 minutes of like real like curiosity and openness and vulnerability and intimacy of like, it's not about facts, it's about people's like core values and like life experiences, and facts don't matter as much.
Right.
And we had to delve through all of that before the facts started to like become effective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was one of the core lessons that I learned from it.
Yeah, and I guess to remind, because I assume all three of us have done canvassing that was not deep canvassing, that was kind of more traditional canvassing.
Shallow canvassing.
Yeah,
Shallow canvassing.
the superficial canvassing. But I mean, I think is still the dominant model of canvassing today. And just to remind people what that looks like, especially for ballot initiatives and elections, usually there's a first phase, which is IDing. And you're basically trying to score people on a scale of like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, sort of like you actually started your conversation out with. But in a traditional...
something I forgot. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, hop in.
After all that shit I just described, we would end the conversation by like being like, okay, now after we've talked on a scale from 0 to 10, how do you feel about the policy?
Oh, so you circle back around.
Yeah, and we can measure movement.
Right.
Very cool.
But
awesome. And I want to ask you more about whether people actually changed afterwards. But so the traditional model is you ID people, and traditionally, if you identify someone who was opposed to your issue anywhere, like 1 to 2 on a 5 scale or 1 to 4 or something, then you're going to ignore them forever. You don't talk to them. You leave them alone, and you move on. And if you identify someone who supports your issue or your candidate, you also write them down and you ignore them until it gets to get out the vote time. And then you try and get them to go to the voting polls, but you don't talk to them anymore. And the whole goal of the IDing phase is to identify undecided people. And then you spend the entire rest of the campaign up until it comes time to vote, trying to persuade the undecideds, right? Which you do by bringing in your talking points and your frequently asked questions. So you have like a list of things that you lecture them on to convince them that you're right and to like push them off the fence. But you don't have a human conversation where you say, just like you were saying, well, why do you believe the way, or why are you undecided? Which could be another question, what are your feelings about this? A real human to human conversation that might take some time, because you can't have a very quick, and this is the other thing, obviously, if you're canvassing on a campaign, they want you to hit a lot of doors in a certain amount of time. They'll actually assign you a certain amount of turf. They'll be like, here's your turf. You have to cover all this area. And it creates kind of a pressure to move quickly, right? To hit all these doors in a certain amount of time. And so that's like the traditional model that it turns out doesn't work. Especially, and I think especially this came out of, I think part of the reason this came out of like California and the LGBTQ community is because it might be that you don't have enough people initially back then when that ballot initiative passed who were in the support column where you could just ID supporters and, like, okay, now we'll just turn out our supporters at election time. You might actually have to win people over who are not in the undecided column, who are in the anti column. And that requires a whole different type of organizing. And it's really cool to hear the kind of step-by-step process that they had you go through there.
Yeah. So did you feel like, getting down to did people's numbers change over the course of that conversation?
Sometimes. It happened. It would happen. It was a well-designed, evidence-based conversation that like did work sometimes. Let me lay down the anecdote of like my favorite conversation I ever had with a voter in phone bank.
Yeah.
All right, I call her, she picks up. I'm like, hi, I'm with this Freedom for All Massachusetts, transgender equality. right off the bat, she's like, "Oh, I don't agree with transgender." It's like, all right, well, we can work with this. So I asked her a little bit more about it. She ended up telling me that she is the mom of like this boy who's like this disabled child who gets bullied really like ruthlessly at his elementary school, and how much she loves him and how she'd like do anything for him, and sort of that like loving protective instinct sort of got triggered in her when like we started talking about it. And so I was able to bring it around to like, trans people aren't just like random dudes who dress up like that's your kid, bro. Or that could be your kid, bro. And being able to be like, yeah, I was a young person. I'm trans. I was a young person not that long ago. It was very difficult. Having, like structural support from like the law and from my parents or whatever, that makes a huge life and difference, life and death difference for people. And then like once I was able to like reframe it in those terms, she was like, oh yeah, okay, no, this makes sense. Like I'm a likely supporter now.
Wow. That's incredible.
But we never would have got there if I hadn't asked the right questions and gotten her opening up about her family. And I was like almost like kind of tearing up at the end because I was like, wow, damn, like she like really, really loves her kid. Like this is an amazing person who just like hasn't been challenged in the right ways in her beliefs.
That is such a sweet reaction to someone who began the conversation denying your humanity, right? Like, and you, by the end of it, you were like, this person is actually a good person who, I mean, that's about you and your capacity for being, I think, for love.
Yeah, I think just like temperamentally, I kind of try to see people with empathy, even, or I mean, when they like allow for it, sometimes it's like, oh, you're just a fucking terrible person, like but I think I'm good at like, or temperamentally, I tend to have that kind of empathy response. I might have it too much in some cases, in some situations. But like if another person, trans person, heard that and they were just like, oh, like go fuck yourself, ma'am. That's also extremely valid. So it's hard to say. I'm not trying to be like, oh, like reactionaries, like they're just like us. They're like people. But also, it's got to be like some complexity and some like,
yeah.
Sometimes we get like raised in fucked up environments that teach us terrible things. It sits in that complexity.
Do you think that temperament that we were talking about, do you think that's necessary to do deep canvassing? Do you think anyone can be trained on it? Or do you think you have to start out with a kind of, I don't know, with that kind of openness to dealing with folks who are really have shit politics?
One thing that Yes on 3 taught me is that these sort of soft social skills that people think of, oh, you have it or you don't, like, charisma, confidence, they actually can be taught.
Absolutely.
So, from this campaign, I went from being some like hermit cartoonist who never did any political action or never talked to anyone and just saw myself as a sort of like alienated like college student / like would be grad student eventually, like concerned but powerless, and like I was afraid to talk to anyone. My first canvas, my canvas, like my turf buddy. That's another thing they did, like gave everyone turf buddies so that like people had the same geographic turf.
Oh, that's good.
Would
Yeah.
do it outside of the street. One person would do the even. And the canvas length was time bound rather than number of doors bound. So speaking to the stuff you were talking about, Ben, about the traditional model, it's like subtle ways that it like pushes back on and improves upon that. It's like the big stuff and also the subtle stuff. But in any case, yeah, my turf buddy had to basically do my first couple doors for me. I was petrified, etc. But like, they built me up to the point that I was able to be like full-time staff on that campaign for the last like 2.5 months or so, and it apparently did a good job. So I think I'm sure that this comes easier to some people than others, and that sort of setting aside one's own personal dignity and opinions in a conversation comes more naturally to some people than others. I wouldn't be like, oh, you can't deep canvas. That seems kind of silly to me.
Yeah.
I do feel sometimes like I think there are versions of the deep canvassing training in lots of other areas of life. Like there have versions for like the business world. They have versions for like couples therapy. It's basically like, how do you talk to someone, actually care about what they say, hear what they say, reflect it back to them, and then share your own story in a meaningful way. Not like a let's spar with facts and data with each other, which can also happen in relationships, but is actually like, well, what do you want, and what are the values that are kind of behind your feelings on this. So it's like it turns out not everyone is a natural good just human communicator. I think it might just be good human communication that deep canvassing is like teaching us on the doors, in every aspect of life. And when Lizzie, when you were describing just kind of your entry to the movement, also, I was kind of struck by that hour-long training that you talked about. It sounded like not just a training, but actually kind of community building.
Yeah.
And that's not, you could do that with or without deep canvassing, but it's also something I feel like a lot of campaigns skip over.
Yes, and it's terrible. This is something I have a lot of strong feelings about.
Yeah.
I'm like sometimes like the incentives in I'm gonna call it, I'm gonna say Democratic Party campaigns is to treat people like things, and I think that's both ineffective.
Like assets, campaign assets.
I think that's both ineffective and evil.
Yeah, it is evil, right? Like we don't want to be replicating the model of our opponents, right? Like the way to win this is not to be better bad bosses than they are, right? Like we don't want to be treating people who work with us or who work for us as cogs in the wheel. That seems basic.
Yeah, and I think that like the way that Yes on 3 extended like trained staff rigorously and to extend that same sort of curiosity and care and empathy to volunteers as they came in, and trained volunteer leaders very rigorously to extend that same curiosity, that same kindness. I think that all feeds into like a positive culture for deep canvassing. Like it wasn't just being effective at training people on the conversation. It was like sort of creating a whole context, a whole milieu that fostered like curiosity and connection and empathy and values and sharing power and all that jazz.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to, maybe I'll ask Jillian, maybe I'll ask you this question. So I think I wanted to bring this back around to kind of Medicare for All work. And, I think that, deep canvassing has been kind of pioneered by the activist communities that are affected deeply by interpersonal bias, like especially the immigrant communities and LGBTQ communities. Medicare for All is a little bit of a different world. You're not going to be like profiled as a Medicare for All supporter. But I mean, but like, as we were kind of saying, this is
Lizzie
really
has
just
the look
about
of someone who's been profiled as a
right.
Medicare
I
for All
don't know,
supporter.
stamping on the forehead.
Yeah,
But-
no, I'd be like, this past year, I was managing a campaign for Somerville City Council for a DSA candidate, and people were like, "You're the reason we have Donald Trump," and I'm like, and they'd be like,
okay.
Becca, my candidate, did you even vote for Hillary Clinton? Becca, did you even vote for Joe Biden? And like, tell her that shit. So
it's Democratic centrist bias against the left.
I have been profiled both as a transsexual and as a Medicare for All supporter.
All right. Well, you can wear that as a badge of honor. And so, Jillian, I mean, I guess this is just going to say that it might look a little bit different on the doors doing Medicare for All deep canvassing. But how would you see, Jillian, kind of and people have been doing deep canvassing for Medicare for All, including DSA, including National Nurses United. We almost got a campaign staffer from Ilhan Omar's office, the congressional rep in Minnesota, who has apparently been doing with her campaign staff, Medicare for All canvassing in her district. I mean, what would be kind of some similarities or differences, do you think, in terms of Medicare for All, Jillian?
Yeah, I think the differences are definitely what you put out, right? That it's like that really, I'm not likely to be profiled as a Medicare for All supporter. I look like a bougie middle class cis lady, but regardless, I think some of the similarities that are really important are as you know, right? People are not likely to be persuaded by facts on healthcare arguments, right? And in fact, I think it was you who told me this, Ben, that people are actually less likely to be persuaded by you when you introduce facts, even after you've actually told a personal story or made a personal connection.
Yeah, I like to call that my data on why not to use data when talking about Medicare for All. Yeah, there's a bunch of studies showing that they were testing what happens when you're asking people to support anti-hunger movements, and they asked people to make a donation towards an anti-hunger organization, but they did it 3 different ways. In one way, they told the individual story of a child who was suffering from hunger. Another one, they gave data on how many children are suffering from hunger who would be helped by their donation. And then the third one, they did both. They told one personal story and they added the data in. And the personal story alone was the one that did far, far better. People gave about half as much to the data story. And actually, the story plus the data one also didn't do that much better than just data, which I know a lot of people who love their policy, love their data, want to throw it in there after they've told their personal healthcare story. But it turns out it just kind of puts people in a framework, non-moral framework of thinking about the policy in a wonky way. So,
and I think ultimately that's the answer, right? Is that the similarity is that we're trying to agitate people based on their very fundamental moral values, right? Is healthcare a right or isn't it? Are trans people worthy of dignity and respect or aren't they, right? These are moral questions. And I think that agitating people around morality is something that you can't do online. And I think that is kind of one of the major takeaways. I think a lot of traditional campaigns really rely on their campaign ads to do the campaigning for them. Right? They ask those kind of questions of people, right, over TV. And that's bullshit. It doesn't particularly work because people don't like to be talked at. People need to be able to interact. But then in the spaces where we do interact with people, they tend to be online. It's way easier to just trash someone than it is to reach out and have a conversation with them online. And honestly, I think that it's really made us all sort of wusses when it comes to having in-person conversation. I think that actually a lot of people who feel pretty brave behind behind a keyboard, right? They really would panic if they were forced to actually talk about their ideas in person with someone. And so, yeah, I like deep canvassing.
So what you're saying is the opposite of deep canvassing is not traditional canvassing, it's Twitter.
Yeah. Right. Yes, the opposite
Yeah.
of deep canvassing is Twitter.
And as Lizzie was describing her experience with deep canvassing, I was also thinking like, I don't think it's a tactic that corporations could use even if they wanted to, right? I mean, which means it's probably a pretty good grassroots tactic. It couldn't be weaponized against us because you'd need a real human who really cares and values what these fucking corporations are trying to destroy, right? Like, the healthcare corporation, we go up against a lot of moneyed interests like pharma and hospitals and dentists. Most recently, I didn't realize dentists were high up on my list of enemies, but apparently they are now.
Fuck them.
Right.
Those bastards.
Yeah. But there is, I think we have an advantage in the Medicare for All movement, especially when it comes to deep canvassing, which is that I do think almost no one likes the healthcare system as it is now, even very, very right-wing people, unless their income is like really coming from the healthcare system and they have a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Almost everyone is like screwed over by the healthcare system or knows someone or is close to someone who has been screwed over by the healthcare system. So doing a door canvassing where you're asking people their experiences with the healthcare system, you're probably going to get a story and people are probably going to have deep feelings about it. And I don't think I think we also share the same enemies. I mean, does anyone really love pharma or really love health insurance companies and executives? I mean, I don't think there's a deep reservoir of love for healthcare corporations either. So it is easy to kind of go in and share a lot, even if you haven't arrived at sharing the political solution yet. You're going to share a lot in terms of values about like what's broken and what's not okay, and maybe who the villain is. So I have not participated, I don't think, in a deep canvassing campaign with Medicare for All yet, but this is something we really want to start doing more of as society opens up with COVID a little bit. So.
And as usual, like, LGBTQ activists, particularly trans activists, are really leading the way. It's because of folks on the ground like you, Lizzie, who are willing to, put yourself in a really vulnerable position in order to get the job done. And I think we all thank you for that, even though it seems like difficult sometimes.
You're welcome.
Well, we're probably going to ask, I mean, when it gets to the point of actually developing some deep canvassing campaign tools, we're going to have to recircle back with you and maybe some of the folks who trained you, and we're going to have to get some help to really use this canvas effectively. And I did want to, even though we don't have a sort of a deep canvassing training module yet for Medicare for All activists, we do have a Telling Your Healthcare Story training at Healthcare Now, which is like kind of a piece of the puzzle. You really need to have your story to be able to do deep canvassing. So folks who want to check that out can go to our website, healthcarenow.org, and under education, you can find the single payer trainings. And one of those is Telling Your Healthcare Story, and you can kind of walk through it on your own, or you can just email us and we'll do a quick Telling Your Healthcare Story training with you. I also want to just thank one more time, Lizzie. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us a ground view. Yes.
Before we go, can I just really quick
Yes.
ask Lizzie, can you just tell the story really quick of how we met? Do you remember? You were like hanging out by the tea station and our interns were doing a canvas and they asked you to sign a petition, and you got to talking, and within like 5 minutes you had come back to our office with the interns and they were like, this is our new friend and she wants to intern here too. And we were like, oh, okay, great. Sorry. just another sales pitch for the human in-person conversation, and it can bring pretty amazing people into your life and into our movement.
You were deep canvassed yourself. Victim of deep canvassing.
All right, sorry about that.
No
may
worries.
never recover.
So I just want to close by thanking our podcast team, our volunteer podcast team. Our podcast manager is Sarah Sang, and Sarah is leaving us because she has a new job and doesn't have the bandwidth anymore to do it. But thank you so much, Sarah, for all of your help running our podcast. Our researcher for this episode was Sophia Simeon. This is her first episode that she researched. Amazing job, Sophia. And then our show notes writer was Jerry Katz. So we will see you all in a couple of weeks. Bye, y'all.
Ciao, folks. Stay safe
Bye,
and stay
everyone.
dangerous.